Welcome to Rudy's Horror, where the past comes alive with chilling tales and spine-tingling mysteries. Each week, we uncover the darkest corners of history, exploring eerie legends, haunting true stories, and terrifying events that defy explanation. From ancient curses to ghostly apparitions, dive into a world where the unknown lurks in every shadow. Subscribe for weekly episodes that will leave you questioning the line between myth and reality. The Cropsey legend. If you were to somehow go back to the 70s and spend some time in Staten Island, it probably wouldn't take you long to hear about an urban legend of a man named Cropsey. As the story went, Cropsey was a serial kidnapper and killer who lost his son and resorted to stealing other people's children to deal with his grief. According to the legend, Cropsey also had a hook for a hand, scars, burns, and open wounds covering his entire face and body, and a generally horrifying appearance. Considering the mass areas of uninhabited woodlands, it's not all that unexpected that a tale like the legend of Cropsey would make it into the mainstream culture at some point. Unfortunately, this wasn't just a tall tale made up by Staten Island parents to keep their kids from venturing too far into the woods and getting lost. Although the legend has some obviously made-up elements, such as the hooked hand and the horrifying scars and burns, at some point in the early 70s, children in Staten Island really did start disappearing. That's when the line between legend and reality started to blur, and the story of the real Cropsey immediately replaced the urban legend. This is the real story. Andre Rand was a man from Manhattan who was born in 1944 and moved to Staten Island in the late 60s. After working for 2 years at the infamously brutal Willowbrook State School for Children with Disabilities, Rand was arrested in 1969 and served over a year in prison for the attempted attack of a 9-year-old girl. As soon as he was released 16 months later, reports started cropping up of more little girls disappearing all over Staten Island, including 5-year-old Alice Pereira, who was playing in her building's lobby when she suddenly disappeared without a trace. Over the next decade, Rand was the prime suspect in the disappearances and deaths of several other young girls in the area. But it wasn't until 1983 when he picked up 11 kids from a local YMCA and brought them fast food before taking them to the airport that he was finally arrested and sentenced to 10 months in prison again. Throughout the 70s and 80s, dozens of young kids disappeared in Staten Island, and although Rand was often the last person to be seen with them, there was ultimately never enough evidence to put him away for a long time. For many years, he would often be seen hanging around young kids, going on walks with them, and even taking them to lunch and dinner with him at local restaurants. After years of letting him walk the streets as a free man, police would finally have a breakthrough in the case in 1987 when they found undeniable evidence that Rand had been behind the disappearance and murder of Jennifer Schweiger, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome. In 1988, he was sentenced to 25 years to life, and while he was behind bars, more and more evidence was found that tied him to several other disappearances in Staten Island in the 70s and 80s. Unfortunately, he was only charged with one additional major crime in 2004, which was the kidnapping of Holly Ann Hughes, thanks to which he will spend the next 13 years behind bars until 2037. If he lives that long, he'll be 93 by the time he gets out. The Maine Hermit. The Kennebec Valley is one of the most beautiful regions in Maine, with over 5,000 square miles of forests, rolling hills, and natural paradise surrounding the Kennebec River. Many cabin owners of the North Pond area in the Kennebec Valley have described the area as the most peaceful place on Earth, but it hasn't always been that way. All throughout the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, there were reports of over 1,000 break-ins in the North Pond cabins. For decades, nobody knew who was responsible for the thefts, especially since they were always carried out when there was no one home. As the cabin owners soon noticed, the break-ins seemed to follow a pattern, always peaking in the days before Memorial Day and after Labor Day. As for the stolen items themselves, they ranged from food to cooking utensils, to books, to propane tanks, to toiletries of all kinds. In the absence of a concrete suspect, the locals eventually named the thief the North Pond Hermit, even though by this point there was nothing to suggest the break-ins were being carried out by a single person. Although it wasn't uncommon for groups of homeowners to venture out into the woods to try to find the North Pond Hermit, they never found a trace, which only added to the legend's mystery. One afternoon in 2002, 100 people attended a North Pond homeowners meeting, and when someone asked how many of them had suffered break-ins, almost all of them raised their hands. As you can probably guess, the North Pond Hermit quickly turned into somewhat of a boogeyman, with the legend frequently being shared over campfires in the area. For years, nobody thought that the person or people behind the break-ins would ever be found. But in April 2013, a man named Christopher Thomas Knight was arrested in the middle of the woods in the North Pond area by an officer who had made it his sole mission to bring the thief to justice. As soon as he was brought to the police station, the cops asked him why he wasn't answering any of their questions. At first, it seemed as though he was having trouble speaking, but eventually he responded that he was ashamed of himself. As it was later revealed, Christopher had been living out in the middle of the woods by himself in an unheated nylon tent, surviving only on the things he stole from nearby North Pond cabins. Shockingly, he had survived winter temperatures of 20 degrees below zero for years and hadn't been to a doctor or taken any medicine for 3 decades. What's most incredible about the hermit's story is that for the entire time he lived in the woods, he didn't have a single conversation with another human being, except for one time when he ran into a hiker and only said hi. Understandably, Chris had lost interest in keeping track of time, so when he was asked how long he had been in the woods by himself, he replied, "Since the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, which took place in 1986. As investigators later found out, he was 20 years old when he decided to become a hermit, just a couple of years after high school, although he never gave the authorities a real reason why he decided to disappear. In all his years of isolation, he went to extreme lengths to preserve his privacy. He never lit fires, only moved at night, and hadn't had any kind of communication with the rest of society for more than half of his life. He'd never driven a car, sent an email, or even known what the internet was until his arrest. Interestingly, as the cops dug deeper and deeper into his story, they realized that his only real possessions were his glasses, which he had been wearing for 30 years and could even be seen in his Lawrence High School yearbook picture from 1984. Everything else, down to his underwear and jacket, had been stolen. After the investigation, Knight was sentenced to 7 months in prison, after which he once again disappeared. According to the cops, he's now living a quiet, peaceful life in rural Maine. The West Hobart Haunted House. In West Hobart, Tasmania, there were rumors of a haunted house that supposedly drove its residents insane. People feared the place, but the truth was even stranger. A toxic plant called datura had been growing near the house, dropping leaves into the family's water supply. The plant has powerful hallucinogenic properties, and drinking the contaminated water caused the residents to slowly lose their minds. What seemed like a ghostly curse turned out to be a case of accidental poisoning. The story of Purple Aki. In the 1980s, people in England spoke of a mysterious bodybuilder named Purple Aki. He would approach young men, ask to feel their muscles, and encourage them to squat for him. At first, it seemed like an odd but harmless obsession, until a teenager, Gary Kelly, tragically died while trying to escape from him. Aki was convicted, but later released. Over the years, he continued his bizarre behavior, leading to multiple arrests. Today, he remains a strange figure, occasionally spotted on the streets of Leeds. The Ghost of Le Loyen. Since the early 2000s, hikers in a Swiss forest reported seeing a strange, masked figure dressed in a cloak. Nicknamed Le Loyen, this person never harmed anyone but frightened those who encountered them. In 2013, a photo of Le Loyen went public, and the sudden media attention forced them into hiding. Later, their clothing was found in the woods, along with a note claiming they had been killed by society. To this day, no one knows who Le Loyen really was or what became of them. The Bunny Man. In the 1970s, residents of Virginia and Maryland reported sightings of a man dressed in a bunny costume, wielding an axe. He was said to chase people and vandalize property. Though no one was seriously harmed, the unsettling encounters turned into a local legend. The identity of the Bunny Man was never confirmed, but his eerie presence still lingers in ghost stories and urban myths. The return of the Bunny Man. Decades after the last known sighting, a new wave of reports emerged. This time, security cameras outside abandoned buildings captured glimpses of a figure resembling the infamous Bunny Man. Residents began waking up to strange markings on their doors, crude drawings of rabbits with hollow eyes scratched into the wood. One night, a group of thrill-seekers decided to investigate the old bridge where the Bunny Man was last seen. As they walked beneath it, they heard faint, rhythmic tapping. When they shined their flashlights ahead, they caught a glimpse of a figure in a tattered bunny suit standing perfectly still, holding an old, rusted axe. The lights flickered. The figure took a step forward, then another. Before they could react, the figure let out a guttural, inhuman scream, and the lights went out completely. By the time police arrived, only one of the thrill-seekers was found, shivering beneath the bridge, repeating the same words over and over. "The Bunny Man is back, and he's not alone."